Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. So this week we are joined by Kelly and PozzA, and before we jump in to this week's incredible action at COTA, and it really was some incredible action, I'm going to jump over to both Poz and Kelly to find out what their thoughts are on the news that we got coming into this weekend, because it was announced pre-racing that Lin Jarvis will step down at the end of 2025 from Yamaha. And so I just want to ask you guys, do either of you think that this was a condition of Fabio Quartararo renewing his contract, or do you think it was something else?
Personally, I just reading up, considering the fact that he has been part of Yamaha racing, like the racing project, for almost 26 years. I feel like it wasn't a clause in Fabio's contract, more a situation where he felt it's time to move on and, let someone else take the reins, maybe try bring Yamaha back to the glory it once had. I've read discussions on it being like a thing in Fabio's contract saying if he renewed whatever, he'd get this amount of money and Lin Jarvis would retire. But I don't think that's true. I think that's just made up, to be honest. That's my opinion. But yeah, I think it's just time to move on, spending about 25 years of your life working on something like this, then just time to go off early.
I'm actually in total agreement on this. I, yeah, I'm quite similar. I think that it probably wasn't part of the contract negotiations. I do think it could have been a situation where Quadraro was told before he did sign his contract. What do you think, Paz?
Honestly, just after Googling something, his official statement was that since he's been with the team since 1999, he said that he's 66 years old now and he's just getting a bit tired of it all, which honestly isn't that bad of not a bad reason. But at the same time, when he started with Yamaha, they were pretty much in the same situation they were now. They weren't very competitive at all. And it might just be a thing of he's brought them up to what they were a couple of years ago, and he might just not feel like getting or going through all that again.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty much in agreement that this wasn't like Quadraro going, this is, a deal breaker. And I do think, as you both have said, it's just time for him to move on. I do wonder who's going to be moving into his spot, but we'll just have to wait and see. And I know it's not like silly season news, but I always find that team movements quite exciting, and I definitely did want to touch on it before we jumped into this weekend's racing. And on to this week's racing, we're going to start with Moto 3.
Moto 3, as always, was a pretty hectic weekend. The race was pretty exciting. A couple of crashes, a fair few crashes throughout the race. But before I get onto all of the results, I just wanted to point out the fact that there was a couple of riders that didn't end up starting the race. David Almanza and Tachkorn Buazri both missed the race through injury. And after qualifying on the front row, Jose Antonio Ruedo didn't end up racing because he he got a bout of appendicitis, which is unfortunate for him. Moving on to the race results, going from P5 up, David Munoz ended up getting P5, sort of benefiting from a bit of late race drama for a few of the front runners. Um, but you've got to be up there to get the results, so he didn't do too badly. Ryusei Yamanaka finished in P4, which was his career best result in the Moto 3 class. So it's good to see him making some improvements. Angel Piqueras finished P3 in his, I believe, third or fourth race. So it's good to see some of the rookies doing quite well up there. Danny Holgado, in a last lap scrap, ended up stealing P2 from Piqueras. And David Alonso won a lights to flag race. Really, no one could get close to him at all throughout pretty much the whole weekend. You guys have any thoughts on the race?
Well, in Moto3 for me, it wasn't good, let's say. I wasn't a very happy woman because, as we know, I had Baker as P1 and then he got hit, hit again, hit a third time, and then for luck, at least a fourth time, and then he went down and crashed. So it wasn't a fun day for me. And if anyone was in the Discord server, you knew how devastated I was. I wasn't screaming, so that explains enough. Apart from that, it was an enjoyable race. A lot of track changing positions, and Yamanaka having that absolute rise to the top to P4. Yeah, no, it was an enjoyable race. I loved it personally. Apart from obviously that.
Yeah, jumping in without a doubt, my moment of the race has to be the Ortola Nepa collision, and I am going to throw some images on screen because where do you even start? It's just hilarious. So what happened was Ortola and Nepa collided, and then you just see Ortola run off, and then Nepa basically chase him. And honestly, I thought that Nepa was gonna deck him, like punch him in the face and things, and we were gonna have a full
Yeah,
showdown.
his hand movements were crazy. He was speeding towards him and he was shaking his fist like that, and I was like, they're gonna have a scrap. I totally forgot to mention that. I actually slipped my mind, but I posted that in my story, and Ivan Ortola saw it as well. I was like, oh, he wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to be just a joke, but no.
I imagine he was seeing a lot of those memes and that sort of thing. Because yeah, when race direction cut away, which they did, you were like, oh no, because obviously they don't want to show that sort of thing. But then it just turns out that he was getting on the wrong bike. That was just, I don't know. It was quite a golden moment and quite a
Trying
lot
to
of,
start it up, and then Nepo was like, what the fuck?
yeah, you could just,
Get off.
yeah, it was just, I don't know, one of those great moments that is quite entertaining in racing, really. So yeah, that's definitely my moment of Moto 3.
Outside of that, I just kind of wanted to go over a couple of the events that happened throughout the race. First one was at turn one, Filippo Farioli crashing after being the first rider to clip Colin Valla's rear. Went down, almost took out Munoz with him. Farioli did end up remounting, and I'm not sure he ended up in the points, but Joel Kelso ended up getting a 3-second penalty late on in the race after colliding with Danny Holgado on the first lap. I personally thought that penalty was a bit harsh just because of how much Kelso lost, and Holgado didn't really lose that much. Do you guys have any thoughts on that incident at all?
I did think it was quite harsh. We've seen much worse moves pulled across all classes, and yeah, I just think it was unnecessary, especially considering the riders involved.
Yeah, no, I agree with Kate there. I think it was just a little bit too harsh. But there's unfortunately nothing we can do. Sometimes they just make the wrong decision.
Quite frequently, they make the wrong decision, if we're honest there.
Later on around that first lap was the Ortola Nepa incident, which was the second time in the first lap that Colin Vaya got clipped. And then a lap later, Ortola ended up crashing by himself again anyway. Fast forward 3 laps, Tayo Furusato went down as well, which I believe was the last time someone clipped Vaya before he had his own crash. Then on lap 10, Joel Kelso had a tip off at turn 1 from, I think he was in P5, he only dropped 2 or 3 positions. And then on lap 11, Colin Vaya had a pretty big high side going through the S's, which essentially, because at that point, the group behind David Alonso was gaining on him by probably just about half a second a lap. I just wanted to see if you guys thought the group could have caught up had Vaya not went down in that instance.
Yes, is my simple answer. I did watch it back this morning. I was quite fortunate to get a little bit of time at lunchtime. And yeah, I think I do think Alonso would have retaliated and then picked up the pace, but it would have made that last few laps a little bit more exciting. Obviously, devastated for Vaya going down, especially after getting clipped so many times and still managing to stay on. But yeah, I do think it would have been a bit more exciting and he may not have won by such a big margin because it was, such a dominating gap, really, and without a doubt one of Alonso's best performances.
Then moving on to the last lap, there was that battle between Angel Piqueras and Daniel Gardo. In the end, there was only a gap of about, I think, 1,000th of a second across the line between the two, with Holgado coming out on top. And outside of that, just wanted to go over where some of the rookies finished. Obviously, Piqueras finished in P3. Jacob Ralston and Joel Esteban were P8 and P9, both after serving long lap penalties. Nicolo Carraro finished P12. Xabi Zuratuza finished P13 on his Moto3 debut. And Noah Detweiler scored his first points in P14.
So, anyone who watched all three classes over the weekend can probably agree that Moto2 was the most boring, but there's still a lot to talk about and a lot to go through. We have Sergio Garcia's maiden win. I was upset because obviously I had Fermin Aldeguer, who actually got his first podium of the season here, so that's great. But I was obviously upset because I had him down as P1. But it was still good to see him. I was very happy for Garcia. He deserved it so much. And then Joe Roberts having a podium, which I didn't expect at all, actually. I was in shock. Even funnier, just to mention the team that he races for, OnlyFans American Racing Team. I just think that's that's an amazing sponsor. It reminds me of Durex sponsoring F1 cars back in like the 70s and 80s. But yeah, I just thought I should mention that. um, there wasn't really crashes this race, I'm going to be honest. It wasn't civil in terms of racing, but there wasn't a lot of crashes. Unfortunately, I was really sad. We had Darren Binder crashing on literally lap 4 of the race at turn 15. If you were on the Discord server, you could have seen that, and everyone was just devastated. Not shocked, sadly, but devastated. Um, there was actually a little battle between Aldeguer and Roberts for P2 as well. Roberts went wide, and then Firm and Aldeguer went straight through. And then a couple laps later, Roberts took it back. And there was a battle for second for a little bit, while Garcia was only about a second in front. So it was closer than you think it was, even though it felt like Garcia did a Max Verstappen and was like miles ahead of everybody else, but he wasn't. But that was quite good actually. And then obviously I can't forget to mention the incredible battle between Alonso Lopez and Fermin Aldeguer. I think if you were in the server, you could see like everyone was getting really excited because a lot of us there really love Fermin or really love Alonso. So for me, loving both, it was great, and I wish I had thought about my predictions a little bit more because yeah, no, I really wish I thought about them a bit more because yeah, no, they are civil with each other, but they will fight, and that could obviously end up quite badly. But I enjoyed it, and eventually Aldeguer came out on top. Um, just to talk about Tony Arbolino having an amazing comeback. By the start of the race, he was like almost last. He was down in like the mid 20s, and then he climbed all the way back up to P11. So very, very proud of him for that. Like making a comeback in Moto2 is actually it's quite daunting and quite hard. And in a more sad concept, Aaron Canet, who I had in my predictions for P2, a bit too optimistic, I think, because he was just slow, really, and fell down to ninth by the end of the race. So that wasn't fun. Mario Ashi crashed. I'm not really a fan of him, so it's obviously quite sad, but I don't really have an opinion on it. And then please, anyone who's Dutch, forgive me for this pronunciation. Zonta van der Gorberg ended his race by riding into the pits. I think I missed that part of the race. I completely missed what happened to him, but he ended up retiring, and yeah, so that's almost it really. There wasn't much else. Oh, actually, I must mention that Ayumi Sasaki missed his race after having an arm pump surgery. He was deemed unfit, so he missed his race. And my reserve, Denise Anchu, finished P22. So this race was actually probably one of my better ones for my predictions. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
And
I'm just going to make a side note here. I'm just going to make a side note here. Dennis Onchu actually came into this weekend having 2 fractured ribs after a crash in training. So I don't think it was an awful result with the injuries that he had.
Definitely not. I think I think I was just a bit too optimistic about his recovery, and I was hoping he'd perform a bit better. But the fact that he managed to stay on the bike with those injuries impressed me. So I'm still happy. Still happy. No complaints.
And to be fair, we just sort of podcast cursed. Is that really what we can call it? We'll talk about the predictions
Yeah.
next week, but yeah, they were brutal. Is an understatement. We all performed absolutely horrendously. But, I do want to just shout out to that Aldeguer Lopez battle because that was without a doubt probably the highlight of the race. I chatted to a few folk that I know, and they said that, these teammates are wonderful, like friends, civil when it comes to that on track action, like Kelly mentioned, but they are not afraid to pull punches. And yeah, I'm hoping we get so many more battles like that this season because it was truly incredible. Anything else on Moto 2 before I have some water and start rambling about MotoGP?
I'm just going to mention that Diogo Moreira finished in P14, so we've had another one of the rookies score points in Moto 2.
Oh my god, I missed that, did I?
Moving on to MotoGP, I will start with a sprint race, and like a sprint, it's going to be a lot shorter than the Grand Prix because, in what I guess is a little bit different, the Grand Prix clearly overshadowed the sprint. So, our top 3 in the MotoGP sprint race, we had Jorge Martin continuing his sprint domination with a P3 on the podium. My Marc Marquez fangirl got quite happy because he settled for a P2, but the sprint belonged to Maverick Vinales, and it was definitely Batmav's weekend. He was so strong in qualifying, followed it through to the sprint, and it was just really incredible. But what I want to ask each of you is we saw the podium celebrations afterwards, and we also saw Marc Marquez dropping some fun dance moves. Do you think they were amazing, or do you think they were cringeworthy?
I think they were incredible. Like, I wish I could move my hips like that. He's like a Shakira reincarnate. I was like, okay. It's it's good to see the riders have some fun though. Like, if you're consistently serious all the time, who's gonna enjoy motorsport? So to see them do some crazy stuff like that, it's amazing to see. I loved it personally.
I just personally like seeing Vinales and Martin in the background, just sort of staring at him, thinking, what is this guy doing? But I did think it was quite funny, personally.
Yeah,
I wish they joined in. Vinales and Martin. I wish they joined in. That would make it more fun because like it's just a bit more sad if the two of them are just like staring at him like, what is he doing? We're supposed to be professionals, and he's over there having fun. I'd like, I would have preferred it if all 3 of them had a bit of a dance, but it's nice to see Mark still at least has some humor in him.
I do actually wonder if they didn't join in because they didn't actually know it was going to happen. And Mark sort of just, I don't know, he's Mark. He sort of just acts on his impulses a lot more, even though Martine does as well. He seemed a lot more reserved, but it could just be the fact they were there for the sprint podium. Some guy comes out singing and Mark just rolls with it because he's sort of used to being in the spotlight a bit more than the others. But yeah, that's just my 2 takes on it. The weekend, though, sort of, I guess I was a bit nervous coming into the Grand Prix because we had such domination throughout the weekend through all the classes. So I'm just going to sort of info dump here, and I apologize if I ramble. where do we start with the Grand Prix? We're coming into it, and obviously, me, myself, Marc Marquez fangirl, I'm like, yes, he's gonna absolutely run away with this. And in the opening laps, we see the pole man, Maverick Vinales, run wide by Bagnaia. We see Mark and Jack Miller crash into each other a little bit, like, just a bit of contact. Same with Mark and Martin. We see Acosta doing the same sort of moves as Mark, and the commentators are like, oh my gosh, Acosta, the next born king. And then Mark pulls the same kind of moves, and they're like, oh nah, it's just Mark being overly aggressive. It's kind of frustrating me a little bit at the moment, if I'm honest, how much the commentators are hyping up Acosta, and given the fact that he's quite similar in riding style to Martin, Miller, and Marquez, it's kind of, yeah, it's irritating me, but it's also quite fun to see the guys at the front who don't hesitate to get their elbows out a bit. And they definitely got their elbows out for the, you know, first 13 laps of this race, because it was without a doubt, in my opinion, one of the best races we've seen in history, well, modern history, in recent years. MotoGP is suffering that sort of slump in racing, but this race you wouldn't hesitate to sell that to people. I do want to ask your guys' thoughts on this Acosta KTM situation. I know I asked really recently, but Acosta came P2 in this. He was battling at the front, and in his post-race interview he said, you cannot imagine how much I enjoyed overtaking the boys. And that was such a good quote from him, because it's sort of like that fun and that banter. But his performance was the only KTM of note this weekend. Jack Miller started out strong and then ended up dropping back. Binder had a horrible weekend, and I'm probably at the moment more of a Binder fangirl than I am a Marquez fangirl, so that really sucked. And then teammate Augusto Fernandez is sort of nowhere and looking a bit rough. What do you guys think about KTM at the moment? Is there anything you guys want to say about it?
I don't think KTM struggles as a team at the minute. I feel like COTA just wasn't really the track for them. But like Pedro, I still firmly believe he'll be in the factory KTM. Within the next year or two, I feel like he will replace Miller, and then, like you said before, Miller would be offered the Tech 3 seat, but it'll be unknown if he take it. Um, I feel like Binder had more in him than he had this weekend. I think it's just like a bit of a mistake on his part, and he'll come back stronger as he always does. But Miller is Miller. He stays the exact same. So I feel like the focus on KTM is more who's going to have the 2025 factory seat. That's my thoughts on it.
Obviously, being Australian, I am quite a massive Jack Miller fan, and I'd love if he could keep that factory seat. But just with the way that Acosta's been performing already so early into his MotoGP career, I do feel like eventually he's going to start sort of pressuring KTM to give him that factory ride. And I do see them at least offering Jack a straight switch to put him into Tech 3.
Bro.
Whether or not he takes that, deal would be a whole different sort of mess. But I do think sooner or later they'll have to put Acosta up. He's just too good at the minute.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Brad Binder was sporting an injury this week, so he did have. This is my Brad Binder fangirl showing. He did have a broken foot coming into the weekend, and then on Friday we're testing new setups, so they didn't automatically qualify for Q2. In Q1 he ended up crashing, So he qualified in P17, not the start to the weekend. And with, this weekend schedule, you've really got to be on it from the very first moment. And so that definitely hindered him. But worse than my Brad Binder fangirl heartbreaking, it was my Marc Marquez fangirl heartbreaking. Yeah, Mark got into the lead, and then it's like, sweet, he's gonna put the hammer down, and then he puts something down, and what he puts down is his bike, and he crashes out, and that was pretty brutal. And yeah, got muted in the Discord server, which is always fun, but it was quite devastating. Looking back, however, I have to admit that I'm not entirely sure, even if he didn't crash, that he would have won. Because Maverick Vinales, I don't think we can underestimate or underemphasize how strong his performance was this week. Because he put on such a dominant performance. He was so far ahead, he was so strong. Every single thing with him and that bike on the Aprilia definitely sort of came together. And yeah, the incredible performance. Aprilia managed to stay reliable. It was definitely one of the best weekends. And actually, I think it was probably the most dominant weekend of Maverick Vinales' career. This has probably got to be, he'll be coming away from this, in my opinion, that this was the best weekend of his Grand Prix career. Do you guys agree?
Oh, well, as we know, I started watching probably not in Maverick's prime years, but for now, from what I see, I think his performance is better from what from what I've seen. I feel like this is the best I've seen of Mav, so it's good to know. I did like him last season, so it's good to see that there is something in him. Um, yeah, no, for like obviously, Paz might have a better opinion than I do because he's watched it for longer. But from what I've seen, it's one of his better start to the seasons, and definitely one of his best races. So yeah, I'm excited to see if that kind of goes through the full season. If he might win another race, or maybe even just a sprint.
I'd say it was definitely his best sort of couple of stringer races for Aprilia. Definitely up there with his whole career, but some of those early races in, say, 2017 for Yamaha, first 2 or 3 races in 2021, they were all also pretty good. But yeah, I'd definitely say that it's up there with the best that he's performed in his MotoGP career so far. And it'd be great to see if he can carry that on throughout the whole season and sort of really put up that fight to the Ducatis and sort of KTMs in the title fight.
And this is where we have had to cut it. What an incredible weekend at COTA. Honestly, we could have rambled for hours, at least 2 or 3, but this podcast is a podcast. It's not an audiobook. So please tell us, as always, what your thoughts were on that captivating COTA Grand Prix. We read every single comment. We appreciate every like, every subscribe, and we will be here next week previewing the Jerez Grand Prix, and also I will be attending it, and we will be getting, hopefully, some trackside action. So, see you next week.